biggest thrill is to see the ball go through the hoop. Because that's what attracted me to basketball in the first place. The last step is a break step to help stabilize your body and give you the control you need to put the ball in the basket. That's the only time you slow up.
He is almost as old as the game he loves. At an age when most men are satisfied to retire, he is on a non-stop year-round schedule, teaching the game he knows intimately. Physically, he's a small man in a game dominated by big men. But to those who coach and play the game, he is a giant. John McLendon was born in 1915 in Hiawatha, Kansas. But his family later moved to Kansas City, Kansas. When he was 10 years old, a field trip to a new junior high school changed his life.
And when we got to the gym, it was the first time I'd ever seen an indoor gymnasium. And in the middle of the court was a man shooting a basketball. And he was shooting what today would be 4-point shots or 5 points, and making it. And it just thrilled me to pieces to see him. And I ran over and told my mother that I decided what I want to be in life. I want to be a physical trainer and coach basketball. And she said, no, you're going to be a doctor, your brother's going to be a lawyer, and your sister's going to be a teacher. My sister was a teacher, my brother's still a lawyer, and I went to basketball.
70 years later, most people would say he went to basketball in a big way. A college coaching record of 523 victories and only 165 losses. The first African-American coach to win a national championship. And then, just for good measure, won it the next 2 years as well. The first African-American professional coach. And the first coach to battle with George Steinbrenner. But it wasn't that distinction that earned John McLendon induction into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield, Massachusetts. No, John McLendon has earned his honors and the respect of basketball people because of his knowledge and love of the game.
They say that's the coach. I mean, you know, a master planner, strategist. I mean, whether you talk to Clarence Gaines, whether you talk to John Wooden, you know, if Ada Rupp were alive, you know, he would know, and he would have nothing but praise to say for Coach McLendon.
The players really liked John. They liked the way his attitude, they liked his manner of coaching, they liked the way he handled the players.
He was an innovator. He was a builder of character. Knowing his style of play, I think back when he was winning, he came under fire. A lot of people criticized his style, if you could believe that. But all he did was win.
The great stone face. He made John Wooden look like you know, he's an extrovert. I mean, he was unbelievable.
You know, I think what he means is it's something that you can look back, and just like any other historical person, is that you know, he was around when times were tough, and was able to accomplish all the things that he did.
But all that John McLendon has accomplished might never have happened if a caring father never bothered to put his son next to the man who invented the game.
It's one of those things, though, during the Depression, where everyone in your neighborhood was into the same thing. You didn't really know how poor you were because you didn't have anybody but poor people to compare yourself to.
1932, and America is still struggling with the Great Depression. Even though his father has a job with the railroad mail service, John McLendon's options for college are limited. He just wants to learn more about basketball, and his #1 priority is to learn from the man who invented the game, Dr. James Naismith. In December 1891, Dr. Naismith, seen here with legendary Kansas coach Fogg Allen, created the game to give football players something to do during the winter.
I went to University of Kansas, having all my life planned to go to Springfield College, where basketball was invented. Yeah, and at this time, the economic situation in the country, the Great Depression was going on, and we didn't have, my dad and my mother, and we didn't have enough money for me to go to Springfield. So he, in the meantime, had researched where the man was who invented the game, not where was it invented, and he found him just 40 miles from us. Just a great piece of good fortune. 40 miles from my front door was Dr. Naismith. Knowing all the problems at university, I went on there anyway because he was there.
Those problems at the University of Kansas were racism and discrimination. But John's father had worked too hard to see his son's dreams ended because of the attitudes of others.
My dad had just brought me to the campus and said, well, you're a man now, you're going to college, get out. I said, aren't you going to take me to the registrar's office? No. You're on your own, and I want you to take care of things the way you should. Whatever you do here, this was a school that had problems with segregation and discrimination at the time. Try to be right. Try to press for what your rights are. Try to be right when you do that. And the first time anybody puts their hands on you, I'll be up there with my .44. That gave me a very great confidence, because a .44 is a big gun. And he had a permit to carry it because he was working on the railroad, the railway mail. They later changed to .38, so I guess I would have lost some of my confidence. Went in the office and asked where Dr. Naismith was, and they said right down the hall. And I went in his room, and he was sitting at the desk. And he asked me, was there anything he could do to help me? And I said, yes, I'm looking for Dr. Naismith. I want to be a physical education major, and I've been told he's my advisor. He said, who told you that? And I said, my dad. And he said, come on in. Dad's always right. That's where I first met him. Those were our first words.
It wasn't long, however, before John began to experience some of those problems that he and his father knew existed at the university. But now he had the additional insight and support of his mentor, Dr. Naismith.
I went to the first class the first day, and that was the first day he became my advisor in action, because something happened in the class that I didn't like, and I walked out. It was an ethnic joke by the instructor, and I walked out and walked back over to his office. He said, you don't belong in that class, and he doesn't belong in the university. And from then on, I knew that he was on my side about such things.
Such things would include using Dr. Naismith's approach to life, that it's all a game and you must find ways to win.
I went in the swimming pool, and everybody knows the story. They emptied the water. And when I asked the head of the swimming pool program, what did they empty the water because of me or because it was Wednesday afternoon, he said, what do you think? And so the next day I went back again, and they just couldn't empty the water every day. When one of the authorities said to us that the pool really isn't restricted because of your color, it's restricted because we have some students here who don't know any better, who might hurt you or harm you if you go in. Then I asked them to give me their word that they would have mixed swimming, that's what they called it, if for 2 weeks there wasn't an incident in the pool. And they agreed, and Dr. Naismith was my witness. And then at a mass meeting of the black students, there were 60 out of 4,000, over 50 of them came to the meeting, and I asked them not to go near the pool for 2 weeks. Naturally, there wasn't any incident. At the end of 2 weeks, we went back to the authorities and said, nothing's happened. So they had to have mixed swimming. From that moment on.
But dealing with social, moral, and legal issues still took a back seat to the burning passion that had originally brought John McLendon to the University of Kansas.
He set the stage for the kind of basketball that I coached, just on a chance of walking through a gymnasium where there were about 30 or 40 kids, and they had one ball. And he asked me to stop. I was following him around. And he said, let's look at this. I stopped on the sideline, looked at all these kids playing, and he said, what do you see? And I said, a lot of kids playing ball. He said, watch them. I did. I said, well, everywhere the ball goes, they go. He said, that's the way you're supposed to play basketball. A little more structure, a little more system, but when you have possession of the ball, that's where your offense begins. When you have the other team's got possession of the ball, that's where your defense begins. You're supposed to play basketball all over the floor.
But he also learned from Dr. Naismith that there is more to the game of basketball than the one played on the floor.
He talked about it all the time. In fact, one of my jobs in his class was to get him off the subject of anatomy and have him talk about the game. But he didn't talk about X's and O's and structure of the game. He talked about mostly events that had happened in the game in the past. And also he talked about philosophy of the game, different games. And also he liked player-coach relationships. He could have written a book on psychology of coaching.
John McLendon, however, has written a book about basketball, 2 of them in fact, but John has always been willing to share his knowledge and philosophy of the game.
The amazing thing to me is John McLendon is a link from Dr. Naismith. I mean, that's like saying that Albert Bell is a link to Abner Doubleday. I mean, you don't have those anymore. I mean, we're watching a legend here.
So that's another way in which his life was touched, and part of his destiny, I think, was chosen as regarding basketball and regarding the legacy and the continuation. So I think there are a number of people out there who were taught by John McLendon who should be very proud to say, that they were taught by John McLendon, and hopefully maybe one of them will be the next John McLendon.
Well, the legend is all there. It's a little guy from Kansas City who went to the University of Kansas. I mean, it's unbelievable that he never played. John was a boxer and a swimmer, never a basketball player. Yet this is where he's made his fortune, and his fame is in basketball.
After graduating from Kansas, the fame would be forthcoming, but to achieve it, John McLendon would have to use every lesson learned from Dr. Naismith to conquer both the game of basketball and the game of life in a divided society.
The lesson I learned out of it is if you have some adversity, there's a way to escape from it or to overcome it. And in this case of this racial thing, every move that was made against me turned out with some other plan that was better.
After graduation from Kansas, John went to graduate school at the University of Iowa, thanks to some help from Dr. Naismith. Then it was time to begin the coaching career that would lead him to the Hall of Fame. The first stop was at Kansas Vocational School near Topeka. But when the principal refused to give him a contract, John joined an old college classmate, William Burghardt, at North Carolina College.
In those days, the schools would hire one man to coach everything, who was also the athletic director. And Burghardt was one of the people in that category. That kind of hiring and that kind of practice finally went out about 1950. So after 3 years, I became the head coach of basketball. We agreed that I'll help you all I can in football. He'll help me in basketball.
Within 3 years, North Carolina College had a winning basketball team. When John became head coach in 1940, he produced his first championship team. It was also about this time when John began a friendship with the legendary Clarence Big House Gaines.
I first met John McLendon when I was a student at Morgan College in Baltimore. And we came down to play North Carolina College for Negroes, it was at that time, and this friendly little young guy, he had all his hair then too. And he had a positive impression, left a positive impression with me because he came over, greeted us, and I think they beat us that night. And we could see that he had a little bit different idea about basketball than what we had in our conference.
By 1945, Big House became the head basketball coach at Winston-Salem College in North Carolina. On his way to a career that would make him the second winningest basketball coach in college history, Big House initially sought the advice of the friendly little man he had met years before.
Coaches have role models also. So really, he was my role model because the way he taught basketball was much different than the way that I had learned it. I wanted to find out everything that he knew. So we actually recruited together.
He said he was going to get started, and what advice could I give him? So I gave him the advice, well, why don't we practice with each other on weekends until the season starts? We agreed on that we would practice.
Hey, House, going strong.
Yeah, they're going strong.
And those guys, you know, I mean, they're like frick and frack, whatever. And when you go on a trip with them, you don't see one without the other. And they're always available.
That friendship would lead Big House to a 47-year career at Winston-Salem College. And John McLendon was beginning to establish his own history-making career, a career that would help eliminate the racism and discrimination that prevailed in the game before the 1960s.
But what we had to do in North Carolina, and more especially in Virginia, and even more especially in Tennessee, when we traveled in our own bus. And we never stopped anywhere for food. You run into problems trying to eat this place or that. So we always had box lunches. We'd go by the campus of another school, and we'd arrange to stop there and eat. We knew where the filling stations were who would serve you. We knew whether they had segregated toilets, water fountains or not. And you went to great lengths not to have a confrontation.
Despite all the planning, however, confrontations were inevitable, like the time in late 1941 when John was an assistant football coach at North Carolina College.
We were on the way back to Durham, North Carolina, and we had been rented a car on the Southern Railway by Southern Railway Company for our own car. As we approached Newman, Georgia, a big group of white people from that area boarded the train. When they found out that we had a car of our own, they came into the car. They wanted us to get off the train, or they weren't going to let the train proceed. These people, they didn't call us people, they don't deserve a special car at all. And right at that time, a kid started running up and down the platform outside of the train, yelling, "Pearl Harbor, Pearl Harbor, bombed by Japanese." And the few people on the platform and in the station all rushed out to get papers, and so did our adversaries. They left the train, so I remember Pearl Harbor for another reason.
By 1945, John and 3 other coaches established the basketball tournament to spotlight historically black colleges and universities. The colored, now called Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association. As you might expect, John's team won the first championship, defeating Virginia Union University in triple overtime. By the early 1950s, things were changing at North Carolina College, and events were set in motion that would shape the legend of John McLendon.
Yes, change of administration. President changed administration, and I don't want to sully his name, but he didn't, well, let's put it like this. He thought the school had different objectives, and he didn't dislike sports. He just wanted sports not to be important. See? So I left.
The next stop would be a short stint at Hampton University in Virginia. But the real recognition of John McLendon began at Tennessee State University. It was also one of the happiest times in his life.
Oh, tremendous, because I had a president at Tennessee State who, he didn't believe in anything but winning. He'd do anything to win. You had to restrain him. But on the other hand, you got that kind of president, you can do the right things better. You know, Dr. Davis was his name, Walter S. Davis. His motto was A number one in a deluxe fashion.
But racism and discrimination still kept the black schools out of the major national tournaments. So John helped create the National Athletic Steering Committee to negotiate, first with the NCAA.
We took into account whether we should call it the Negro Athletic Steering Committee, but we decided that we would use negotiation as our base rather than publicity. We wanted to negotiate with all the principals of people that we felt, the principal group of people, rather than do anything outwardly or identify ourselves as Negroes in those days. We just wanted to be identified as a group of people who were being left out of the national programs.
But the NCAA wasn't interested.
Then we went to the NAIA next. And Al Dewar, who was, in my opinion, the Abraham Lincoln of basketball in this country. He was executive director, oh yeah. He was executive director of the NAIA. And he had gone through the experience when his first year of the team from Morningside College in Iowa coming to the tournament in 1946, having a black player on the team, and they would not let him play. They let him dress and sit on the bench, but he couldn't go in the game. And by that time, they'd thrashed out how stupid it looked and how their organization, under his direction, wasn't going to be involved in this kind of continued discrimination.
John's predecessor at Tennessee State, Clarence Cash, was able to take advantage of this change in attitude as one black team was allowed into the 32-team tournament in Kansas City.
Clarence took the team there. He went to the quarterfinals, lost to Regis College in the third game. And the Kansas City Star has a line in it if you want to look it up sometime. And they played like the other teams.
In 1954, John was promoted to head coach at Tennessee State and was quickly invited to attend the NAIA's National Invitational Tournament to be played during the Christmas holiday. But John knew there were problems with the prospect of playing in Kansas City, so he was ready for the call from Al Dewar.
He said, I guess you know you're going to play in our Christmas tournament. And I said, yeah, I looked the schedule over and I can see that, but I'm not coming. And he said, why? And I told him, I'm not coming because my team is coming there to win, and they're too great a disadvantage if we're not staying in the same hotels nor having the same accommodations that other teams have. He said, but we've advertised, and everybody's expecting you. Does your president know that you are making this statement? I said, no, and it doesn't really matter because I'm going to be the one that makes the decision. And he said, how long will you be by the telephone? I said, all day if necessary, and call me back to say you can stay at the Hotel Kansas Cityan and you can eat at any place any other team eats in the downtown area. So this was a great milestone in black college history.
But John McLendon and history were just beginning to become acquainted. While at Tennessee State, his team won 4 Midwest Athletic Conference championships. But more importantly, in 1957, he became the first black coach to win a national championship when his team beat Southeast Oklahoma in the NAIA tournament.
Opposing the Southeast Oklahoma State team for this National Intercollegiate Basketball Championship tonight is Tennessee State College of Nashville, coached by J.B. McLendon.
I don't know what you know about Tennessee State, but it's a small school. We must have had 3,500 students at the time. We were playing in Kansas City between, I guess in front of 15,000 people. And the people of Kansas City came out and treated us royal.
When you talk 32-team tournament where you start playing at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning and you have a champion crowned at 6 o'clock on Saturday night, and you have to play 4 games or 5 games that week, whether you're seeded or not, I mean, that's where his conditioning showed. I mean, they just dominated.
During the basketball game, John would say early on, okay, guys, we're going to play 7. There are 5 players and there are 2 officials, so we're going to play against 7. So I said, forget it. Don't worry about it. You're playing 7. John is a man who believes in overcoming obstacles.
But even John couldn't overcome the obstacle of an announcer, obviously unnerved by the significance of the moment, and awarded the trophy to the wrong school.
Coach Johnny McLendon, your East Tennessee State national champions in 1957.
But John did overcome enough obstacles to win the NAIA 3 years in a row, the first time any coach, black or white, ever won 3 consecutive national titles.
I was at the Final Four, and I believe it was New Orleans, and they had a panel of coaches. They were honoring Coach McLendon, I believe 1 or 2 other coaches, but John Thompson got up and he was the master of ceremonies, and he talked about how I think Billy Packer or someone, I'm not sure if it was Billy, I can't attribute it to Billy, but someone asked him what was it like to be the first black coach to win a national championship back in 1984, I think it was he won it, and he says, well, I don't know, you need to ask John McLendon, who won the championship back in 1957.
But even as the times were changing in America in the late 1950s and early 60s, John McLendon had his eye on a bigger prize, coaching teams that had both black and white players. After more than 20 years as a legendary college basketball coach, John McLendon was ready for a new challenge. In 1959, the challenge came in the form of the new Cleveland Pipers team, created by Ed Sweeney to join the National Industrial Basketball League.
Oh yeah, it was the only choice. We never interviewed anybody else. We sat down with the beat writers from the Press and the Plain Dealer and the news at the time, and some of the media people, the 6 and 11 o'clock sports guys, and we said, we're thinking of hiring a black coach. What do you think? And there was a real dead silence among a group of people who were very open-minded, and they thought, I don't know if this is the time.
I took 3 of my players from Tennessee State and added them to a very fine array of all-stars, and we played the Industrial League champion, the Denver Truckers, at the old arena, and we won the game, and I was claimed as a person ready for the big job. I guess that was all in the plan. I always wondered what would happen if our team had lost.
One of the players John brought from Tennessee State to the Pipers was Ron Hamilton, now a successful businessman in Cleveland. He remembers John may have changed jobs, but not his approach to the game.
John had a system, and the player had to fit into the system. And I guess I could tell you stories about the best ball players didn't always play, but the ball players that fitted the system did play. He certainly knew what he was looking for.
Great coach. He was way ahead of his time. I mean, it was up-tempo, get the ball, run.
The thing that is significant about this to me is this was the first time that black coach ever got an opportunity to go beyond the college level. This is a post-college event. It's a level that's, at that time, was a step up. And in an established league that was full of expert players.
But even at a new